Alright, now we're on 5.5. We're going to solve polynomial equations, but first we're going to talk about factoring. Now, all of this is actually, I think, that's a pretty useful note, so I would actually recommend for you to print those out on your own, if you like, because this actually has all the ways so far that we have done factoring. We have difference of squares, sum of cubes, difference of cubes. We have doing the perfect square trinomials. We got bottoms up, or in our case, I don't know what you call it. I'm going to call it the X factoring or extreme factoring. Right, that's the same thing. And notice that they even give you the signs here. And then finally, you got factoring by grouping, or if you have 4 terms. So on this, I'm actually going to go through it pretty fast, but we're always going to talk about factoring, right? So if you still don't know how to factor, I got some bad news for you. You're probably going to fail the next test, just like you did the previous one. And so make sure that you are able to factor. This is not impossible. You just have to put your head down and really try to do this, right? So as always, we're always going to look for a greatest common factor. In this case, the greatest common factor between 14 and 42 is 14. All right, now let's look at those x's, all right? Those two x's right there, which one's smaller, x squared or x? Now, x is going to be the smallest one. So this is actually going to be a common factor for both of these now. So I'm going to factor out an x, and then look at the y's, all right? You're going to actually factor out the smallest of these y's, because y squared is a factor of y cubed. So we're going to factor that out. Once you figure out your greatest common factor, essentially all you're doing is you're going to divide each one of these by 14xy squared. All right, so if I do that here, I'm going to get x plus 3y. And one more time, I want to write it up here in case you don't know what I'm talking about. You have those two. If you divide that by 14xy, that cancels. This cancels. You end up with an x up here. And then you cancel. You end up with xy. Oh, wait a minute. xy squared. Okay, yeah, never mind. Both of these cancel. You end up with just an x, just like I did, right? So that's how I ended up with just an x, because that's all you're left with here once you divide. All right, so in that case, look at the inside of this, and you cannot factor anymore, so that's it. All right, so let's move on to number 2. Counting how many terms do you have? You have 1, 2, 3, 4. If you have 4 terms, you're going to factor by grouping. All right, so you're going to look for the greatest common factor between those two, which in this case is 6m. You're going to be left with m plus 3. And between those two, remember, if this coefficient right here is negative, you're actually going to factor out a negative, okay? So we're going to factor out a negative here, -1, and we're going to be left with m plus 3. Right after that, you're going to write it as 6m minus 1, m plus 3. Okay, so that's that for that. All right, on the next one, remember, we have a trinomial. We have 3 right here. Always look for your greatest common factor first. In this case, that's going to be 2. So we're going to factor out a 2, and we're going to end up with this. And essentially, all we're looking for, and if you don't know the signs, you can look them up here if you like. And essentially, all I'm looking for is factors of 8 that add up to 9. Well, that should be 8 and 1. So that's that for that one. All right, let's move on to number 4. If you have 2 terms, then you're either looking for a difference. In this case, you have a minus. So you're either looking for a difference of squares or a difference of cubes. In this case, because that degree is even, all right, s to the 4th, and is not odd, definitely not odd, then I can actually take the do this by factor difference of squares. All right, so I can factor this by difference of squares. So I have this. Now you have to look at each one of these and then ask yourself, can I factor one of these one more time? And in this case, you can factor this one more time. This would be x plus 1, x minus 1. That's another difference of squares. And this one is not a difference of squares because I have a plus right here. So this is it for that one. All right, on the next one, same thing. Look for the greatest common factor. So this is very similar to number 1. I'm actually just not going to talk about it very much, but let's see if you can get this. I really do want you to try to do this one on your own, and if you can't, then make sure to come see us in the morning. All right. Number 6, always look for your greatest common factor. Once I get my greatest common factor, then I have 2 terms inside the parentheses. Look at them. Both of these are cubed. I have a sum here, so I have a formula for the sum of cubes. If you remember, that was r, the cube root of 125 is 5. R squared minus 5r plus 5 squared, which is 25, right? So this formula, remember, that's the difference of cubes, which is this formula right here. All right? Excuse me, the sum of cubes, which is this formula. All right. So on number 7, for example, we have this example. I know that for a lot of you that's hard to know, but think of square roots. Or if I think of the square root of 100, I know that's 10. And the square root of 9 is 3. And the square root of 8 is actually, the square root of m to the 8th is actually m to the 4th. Okay, so this would be that plus that. So this is actually the difference of squared. Kind of weird, right? Now this one right here, can you think of factors of 1 that have to add up to 1? The answer hopefully is no, you can't, because there's none. So this is actually a prime factor, or that means you cannot factor that. It's unfactorable. All right. Number 9 is pretty interesting. Now number 9, always look for your greatest common factor. Look at every term. What do they have in common? All right. If you have a letter, if you have a variable in every one of these, you're going to factor out the smallest one. Which in this case is this. All right. Now after that, I'm going to do the factor by grouping. So I have this. Sorry, my parentheses and my C's are looking pretty much the same. All right, I'm going to put a bracket instead on here. So we have, let's see, C squared. So that's going to leave me with C plus 1. Factor out a negative 1 here. I have a C plus 1. After that, join them both together, so I'm going to end up with C squared minus 1.
Teachers, please pardon this interruption. Seniors, this is just a reminder that if you are signed up for the college question and answer panel with Coach Shahan, please report to the auditorium following this class period. Make sure to bring all your items with you. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
All right, that announcement will go into the interwebs forever. But notice that this right here is a difference of squares, so I went ahead and factored that too. Okay? All right, I'm actually going to record the second part of this notes in a different video, so make sure you watch the second part of 5.5 when we're actually going to use factoring to solve polynomials.